Welcome to the Moon God Pod. I'm your host, JwowLax. With me always is my guy, Lovox. And today, man, we got two bangers in a row. We had the creator, Micah, and today it is Roger, RD, my guy. If Micah is the creator, then are you the executioner of Aku now? You're like the Achilles, like the hired gun.
Executioner sounds kind of spicy, man.
Yeah, I'm getting after it.
I like
Bright
it.
and early. Well, welcome, Roger. We've been wanting to have you on. Uh, we had you on with JB and talking about Aku Cribs, but today it's all about you and kind of getting to peek behind the curtain. So I wanted to start with who was Roger before Web3?
So I call it the three dots. This is how I describe my life. My childhood was a lot about art appreciation, but in various forms. Right. I always liked aesthetics. I enjoyed collectibles and comic books and cards and art to an extent. Not a formal art education or anything like that, but I was just obsessed with these things growing up. Had many friends who were trading partners, and we would obsess over things and go to different stores and markets and like all that good stuff. What you might expect, some of that carryover to today's NFT and art landscape. And we get a little further, and I slip into academics, business, and finance. So I came out of college, and it was a global market making firm. Did that for a span of 3 years. And then I split off of that to be an entrepreneur and to start a business and to start what actually ended up being a few businesses. But then comes sort of the grand anomaly of my life. And I met my now wife. And when we had gotten together, she was a former gymnast, and we ended up pairing up. At the time, I was exploring creating a fitness and wellness business in the virtual space. And we ended up pairing up and creating a brick and mortar. And we built a fabulous community, grew it, moved it. It was a really enjoyable, hard, but an enjoyable time in life period. And we did that for a little over a decade. And that phase for me, while now it feels like an anomaly in a way, that was all about community, like growing a community and having a lot of people being focused on the same thing, being part of the same thing, a lot of empathy, a lot of connection. And then we moved to COVID. And when COVID happens, that was really the moment for me where I was already, for the last few years of the fitness and wellness business, I was doing things, music to your guys' ears. I was playing some poker. I was out there sort of exploring different investment avenues, kind of putting back on that global market making firm and investment hat that I had put aside for quite some time. And I was interested in getting back involved. I needed to wake that side of my brain up. So I was exploring everything at the time, everything. I was a cryptocurrency. I understood it, but didn't believe in it. From the jump. I mean, I remember talking about Bitcoin when my friend was buying it at $20, and I thought it was stupid at that point. I wasn't ready to be red pilled. And then we fast forward to 2016. 16 was really where I was like, yep, I get it. Like if today it made sense for me to invest a bunch in Bitcoin, I would, right? And I actually ended up putting skin in the game starting 18, 19 and moving forward. But I was exploring everything. It wasn't just cryptocurrency. It was all over the map. And I land on the term NFT, the acronym NFT, in the summer of 2020. And at first, it was actually associated with an auction house, physical art auction. It was a major physical art auction that had an NFT as the provenance token. And that was fascinating to me. And then that led me off into the art market, sort of what we understand today as like the NFT space, so to speak. By fall of 2020, I was not understanding first come, first serve and trying to click in and buy a Beeple in his first drop in October of 2020. And then epically failing, and then Ferocious, his first drop on Nifty Gateway. And then I understood, okay, I need to get a little more savvy because people want these things, right? At the time, looking at it strictly from an investment perspective, in just a few months' time, when I started to get my feet wet, I started to say things to myself like, hey, okay, I'll go in and I'll trade this art drop tonight, right? But I like that one piece. I would start to say things like that. Like I enjoy this artist, and that one piece I really like. So if I could just trade this drop, I'll come out at the end of the night and I'll vault that. Like I'll set that one aside because I started to see value in holding things long term, especially as I started to understand just more about art. It was a rapid fire education process at the time. And then all of a sudden, by the beginning of the very next year, I was interviewing artists all the time for NFT origin stories. I launched that just because I was curious. Launched that with my friend Parrot, and the curiosity just built on itself until I brought myself over in the space full time in February of 2021. Launched Artifex, and then everything sort of kept morphing and changing for me as that went. But there's the premise, so you guys can go wherever you want with it.
Oh, that's super interesting. And welcome, RD. Thanks for being on the pod. Going back to phase one, you mentioned that you were very much into collectibles. What kind of collectibles was it, and what caught your attention back then?
Oof, it was everything. I had a heavy comic book phase, and for me, what a comic book phase would mean, and this speaks to some of my process today, is I wanted to understand. I wanted to understand. I wanted to go back to the beginning, go back to where did this take off. I always wanted the origin story. Where did this character, or where did this series begin, and who was the creator, and who are the artists behind it. I started establishing like my favorite artists. Jay Lee was my favorite artist across comic books, and then of course all forms of cards, and then a little bit in the middle grounds of like, I don't know, loosely toys, but always spawning from a body of IP, right? That would be a comic book or would be a card set, and like sort of what else was out there, what other forms of expression. I would say predominantly focused around that. And in fact, in the art side, I recall when I started work in finance, I had this aha moment, and I'm like, should I get a piece of art? I should get a piece of art. I started doing some research as to what that piece of art would be. And I was thinking about, I don't know, it was, call it $500. But I was thinking like, I want to make a serious investment in art. Then my mind got fixated on work, and I sort of left that behind for a stage of time.
Did you, so with the NFT space, and like, what was the first NFT that you bought? And, a lot of people were onboarded really with NBA Top Shot. It doesn't sound like that was your Eskimo.
Top Shot did not onboard me. I did dip a toe in Top Shot early on for me, but it was already that people were doing it and seeing success, and I'm like, I should check it out. I have a respect for sports cards. Mm-hmm. I could see this form being valuable and important, and so let me at least see what's going on over there. So I think I dipped a toe for a hot minute, made a few bucks, but that at the time I was already splitting off so much into the art lane that really was my first and foremost passion, and it just didn't make sense for me to take too much time over in the Top Shot world. Mm-hmm. But no, so the first art piece that I attempted to buy was either Beeple or Ferocious. It was it was 1A and 1B, and it was just timing. And I'm weirdly good with dates and specifics, but in this case, I cannot remember whether Beeple's first drop in October of 2020 or Ferocious's. I can't remember which one came first, but they were the same sequence of events, which was me lying in a bed trying to fast click on my phone when the window came open, and immediately getting a no, this is sold out message back to me. So they were my first attempts, and then the one that I actually landed was Slime Sunday. So that was the beginning of November of 2020 on Nifty Gateway. His infamous Last Stand in the Nation State. It was a $40 open edition. It was open for, I believe, a few days, and it sold 432-ish editions. That was pretty fascinating. And I remember even having the thought process with myself then, maybe I'll buy 10 of these or 20, 20 of these. This seems interesting, especially towards the end. At the time, 400 pieces plus seemed giant, but not that giant. And so I ended up just clicking one and just saying, I got to start somewhere. Even my wife, I remember her looking at it. She's like, hey, you've been talking about this for a hot minute. It's $40. She actually liked the piece. She's like, this is a cool piece. Just get it. Okay. Got it. And then that was the beginning.
Oh, I think that's fantastic. I have a similar Nifty Gateway story, how you kind of metamorphosis into something, right? So I had the singular phone, and then next thing you know, you have this stronger internet connection. Next thing you know, you have this web of connected devices. Next thing you know, like, wow, I have this full-on operation going. Again, going back, you said you looked at different kinds of ecosystems to kind of understand what your lane were. Can you give us some more examples of things that you were kind of dabbling your toe in to find what you were looking for?
Do you mean prior to NFTs?
Yeah, prior to NFTs, yes.
Sure. Oh, man. I mean, so I mentioned cryptocurrency already. I mentioned poker already, which is an investment of sorts, but it comes with a heavy time investment and focus investment too. Oh man, I remember looking at the existing graded cards market. and I grabbed a couple on on speculation to with the idea to flip relatively soon as that heated up, and did that successfully, but ended up not being my lane. Precious metals at the time, stock indexes at the time. Those are the ones that I remember crystal clearly going down those roads. And then so stock indices, but also specific companies. I remember, what was it? What did I do a bunch of research in? I did a bunch of research into psychedelics, which was sort of following the early stages of like the cannabis legalization trend, or the decriminalization trend at least. And that was interesting for a period of time. So just flexing the brain out, studying various topics, and then like figuring out, okay, now what's the right way to express this? If I have this belief, how do I express this for maximum investment benefit, right? Go through that process, come out the other side, either successfully or not successfully, and then figure out, is this something that I want to repeat? If not, take lessons and move elsewhere. And if so, then just keep going. But it ended up being really NFTs that I wanted to repeat.
So I want to kind of hammer on the poker for a moment as an investor. I want to know what you mean by that and what your process was as far as like how deep did you go down the poker rabbit hole? I mean, it's well established, at least in the Aku community. I did play in the main event this past year. It's probably been my 13th World Series that I've attended, and I, had a career as a poker player. JwowLax is a poker enthusiast. We're trying to get him to play the World Series of Poker this year. He's not a tournament player, but he's a killer on the cash games. And I want to hear your poker story, but I want to then connect it to the NFT space.
Sure. My poker story is split into two. So my poker story begins when I'm 18, 19 years old in college. And I was 18 because I went home for my first summer of college. And then my friends from high school fired up a poker tournament. It was Texas Hold'em, no limit, as you might expect. And I won the tournament. And I do not claim to be good. In fact, I was probably quite bad. No, I was not making GTO decisions. But I had a blast with it, and I have an analytical mind that I at least understood what I was trying to accomplish, and it was fun. And as with anything, early wins often mean a lot of inspiration, right? When you can replicate that sort of feeling of early adrenaline and success, that's a good motivator. And so when I went back to college, one of the first things I did was try to learn more about the game. So okay, I won, cool, but I know I'm not good. How do I get good? And so I started finding poker literature, books, anything that existed at the time. And I also fired up a home game. So I became a home game runner for a while.
Oh, there it is.
Right. And then so I would run that home game first once a week, and then it escalated to 3 times a week. And then I was looking for games to go to outside of that. And I remember, I'm going to date myself, but we are talking about the early 2000s. Mm-hmm. At that time, it wasn't dial-up internet per se, but it was early stage still. And I remember searching card rooms, and is there a card room? Because Rounders obviously was out, and that's the dream. This has to exist somewhere. And I ended up on this shady ad of call this number if you're interested. So this was what it was back then. And so I called the number, and they did the vetting, are you the cops kind of thing at the time. And I ended up in this 2-camera walk-up flight card room in Philadelphia at 19, 20 years old. Mm-hmm. And I remember buying in for $200 at the time, which was a lot, right? And a lot in college. But I wanted a considerable amount over the long haul in home game. They're $20 home games, but you repeat that exercise for quite some time, you have a little bit of a bankroll. So I go in, totally not ready, ready in the sense of I understood the game and I was ready to play and I was ready to execute, not ready in the sense that I was shook by the circumstances. This is exactly the smoke-filled dungeon that you might expect of a card room. I get busted out that first night, tail between legs, leave. I go back the second time, motivated, buy in for the same amount, played my game, got the money in good, got bad, classic bad beat story, left devastated. And it was actually, a 40-something guy who did not like me, did not feel that I belonged or whatever. And he basically berated me on my way out the door. And so that was my, do I come back or do I stay away forever moment? Do I sort of return to the home games or maybe not at all? And I decided I would give it one more shot. And I went back that time, and I grinded out a little profit, and then again, and then again, and then again, and then went on to do quite well at that card room, and then go on to Atlantic City and more formal poker rooms. And then when I started in finance, so I had a very serious firm. They had a poker room, and I loved that about it. Like you could go up after you got off the desk, and you could mess around or play very seriously against very serious people for quite some time. And then work became too much of a bear. So I couldn't take the time that I wanted or needed to keep progressing in the game. And then so I slipped away from it for quite some time. And then fast forward, I started to get a little burnout in fitness and wellness. And I started to say to myself, it'd be fun, like a poker challenge. I haven't played in quite some time. So I said, okay, I want to try to randomly do a 1 month challenge where I'll revisit a card room on X number of days a week and see if I can earn enough money for a family vacation. And
this
I went
sounds familiar, doesn't it, Lovox?
Yes, it does.
And so I re-engaged like that. I ended up earning about half, which is still great. Had some stops and goes and exciting moments and the opposite. And then you fast forward a little bit more time, and I said, all right, now I want to be a poker pro. And that was 2 years. Still running the fitness and wellness business, still keeping up a book of clients there and managing some things. But my wife was gracious enough to understand that this was a passion. It was way too late in life, realistically, to like really go for it. Mm-hmm. But I got my span of time to explore cash games intensely, tournament life intensely, playing 2 main events, two back-to-back years, and then I understood that it was time to find something a little bit more stable.
Hard way to make an easy living, right?
Exactly right.
What were the highest cash game stakes you got up to?
Moonlighted at 10-20.
There you go.
I would say 5-10 more consistently, and then a lot of 2-5 working up to that.
Sure.
Well, it's funny because we talk about this all the time, and the key to being a professional poker player, especially cash game, is it's not necessarily going up in stakes. It's finding the best game. Mm-hmm. Like Phil Ivey, you can try and argue with us, but he's the greatest. The reason why he's the greatest is because you can literally play any kind of poker, Raz, Bugatti, Stud, Omaha, Big O, and he's a bracelet winner in all of them. So that's the skill. We talk about all the time, like if that 2-5 game, if you're able to crush it, like when you go up in stakes like to 10-20, there's these weird jumps where like 10-20, 25-50 is actually really tough competition. However, if you're playing 500-1000 in Bobby's room, you're actually playing against like some big whales. There's a reason why Phil Ivey, Brian Rast, and Durr always, like, as soon as they get a phone call, are on the first flight to Macau. It's because those fat cats from China are sitting there just giving away money, So it's very interesting. I noticed when I first got into the NFT space, I've been off Twitter for so long, and when I kind of re-engaged in Twitter, because you kind of had to be, all the poker players that I was following were like, they would have punks, later they would have apes, like they're all DeFi guys, like they just moved into this space because there's the ultimate gamification for them and analysis. I don't know how proficient you are with pros, but there's a kid named he's not even a kid anymore, Mike McDonald from Toronto, Timex.
The free throw bet?
Yeah. Dude is I mean, I met him when he was 21, and he retired from poker at 21, mind you, and then came back and won like, millions more later. But like, I can't say enough about how that kid's brain works. And like, I would hear him like doing Twitter spaces, and it's like, I couldn't even follow what he was talking about. Like, because he just looks at numbers and analytics in a way that normal people don't. So what I'm kind of getting to is the gamification of NFTs, I think, is in a lot of these projects is really overlooked sometimes. Like, you see all the community is so strong and everything, but really the big winners in this space have been those that really, it's like solving poker.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Man, I mean, even the gamification elements and also the market elements, being able to understand what's happening at a micro level and then macro, like those two things are very different. You can understand swings at one level, but then if the macro gets carried away, you could lose all of that in a second, or gain all of that in a second. And I think it's essential to be able to sort of pull those two things apart, because obviously recently we've seen a sort of macro downtrend in NFTs, but that doesn't it doesn't change the fact that we've seen some really interesting stuff at the micro level succeed or do the opposite and add gasoline.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Moving us up to present day, I heard you mention the names people, the name Ferocious. Can you speak to us on how you got, I guess, united with Micah Johnson for the first time?
Yeah, so Micah for me was a process of exploration. Nifty Gateway was my home for quite some time, and I was analyzing every single release that came out. And the most fun thing about the releases in those days is if it clicked with you and you sort of got excited about what was going on, you had this dawning realization. And the dawning realization was, I am witnessing a lot of artists for the first time that are decade plus into their art careers. And it created this wild market where people were looking at it like it was this fresh face. Oh, this is brand new. And it's like, no, this is a really established artist. Let me understand where they've been before and where they might go. So sort of like premise one, like, do you believe in NFTs and the value of digital asset ownership, and by extension, digital art ownership? And if sort of you cross that Rubicon, then you enter this, wow, this is a really unique slice of time where people are coming into it for the first time, exposing their work to the blockchain for the first time you can own it in that light. What a crazy place, and what a crazy opportunity. And so Micah was towards the tail end of like what I call the glory days of Nifty Gateway, right? Genesis 001, Aku Chapter 1 came out in February of 2021. And I remember being at my in-laws' house, and I remember seeing the flood of mainstream attention. I think it was a Sports Illustrated article and a few other articles, maybe USA Today article. And I went all the way down the Micah Johnson rabbit hole, and the Aku, by extension, the Aku rabbit hole. I said, okay, so who is this? And I remembered Micah even from some card days. I have one of my best friends in the world at that point, once a year, because he still was obsessed with cards through that point. It was like his release and his hobby, from his profession. And so he would break boxes all the time and get into that. And so once a year, I'd sort of go back, a little throwback moment with him. He'd sort of pick the box and we'd crack it together. And he knew all about the ins and outs of what we were looking for and who the players were. And I remember Micah Johnson's prospect here. It was kind of fun. It was fun to go back to that. In my mind. So I became really interested. But Aku, so I'm creator first always, so I wanted to understand that. But then Aku jumped out. The hallway scene, of course, but furthermore, the concept of Aku and the presentation, I thought, really clicked into that concept quite well. And everyone immediately rallied. And I think part of the reason it did so well is people were going through the same process. They were understanding and believing in Micah. They were understanding and believing in the mission of Aku and everything about Aku. Walked into our lives and never left. And so the day of the release, I didn't have a computer. I was at my in-laws. I'm like, I had a rule about sort of not, going down that road too heavily while I was there. The next day, I got home. So it was the day after the release. So there's 1,402 editions. The very next day, I think I rapid fire bought 13, something along those lines. And then it was that was it. Now, in terms of how I connected with Micah at a deeper level, so I was bought into Chapter 1. I for some reason lost the thread in Chapter 2. I think I was forming Artifex. I was founding my company, and so I was doing a little bit less collecting. So sort of lost the thread through Chapter 2. But funny enough, Dirk is the art director of both Aku and Artifex, and so I was working heavily with Dirk at work at the time. And I was very aware of when Dirk was creating Chapter 2, right? When he was going into the trenches on that. But I just didn't keep up with the exact release. I circled back at Chapter 3. So when the classic bottleneck happened, not on release, but after release. So the Chapter 3 market was right around $1,300 per edition at the time. It's probably its like trough moment, like after release. And that was the moment where I said, I now understand what a theoretical moon god path looks like. And I want to do that. And then at that point in time, it was just like, well, how many make sense? And I decided the number was 3. And so I ended up collecting 3 3s and 3 2s to backdate it. And then the rest is history there. Now, Dirk was always saying, you guys would really get along. You should spend some time with Micah. And then finally we did that. Micah came on Origin Stories, right? The video interview show that I was doing at the time. That was great. And then we kind of clicked. We clicked from there, and we just started talking more and more frequently after that moment.
Yeah, the moment that you and I met was at the first Ferocious party, I believe, in New York, 2021. And so, Linux and I were there, and he sits there and is like, "Oh, look, there's Roger. I didn't know who you were." And I was like,
"You're not supposed to, by the way."
Yeah. And I was like, he was like, he's really big on Aku, and I'd seen your tweets or something, but I was still kind of pretty newish myself. And so I was like, well, we need to talk to him. And so my only question was, I was like, what's up with you and Aku? And like, why are you so bullish? And your answer, as everyone in the community should know by now, it was just Micah. And we had interviewed Micah on our first attempt at a podcast. And that was our feeling too. It's like, man, there definitely is something about this dude. I don't know if you actually remember that moment at
I do.
Yeah. So, and that was a great time in the NFT space too. Like that first NFT convention, like everything was like, we went to the Rafik release, and like that exhibit was awesome. That might have been like the very like coolest peak, not the all-time highs, but like the coolest peak of this space. And we were still kind of coming out of COVID too.
We were. Those early IRL moments were everything. Mm-hmm. Like when Artifex, we did this New York City takeover, right? We did that in May of 2021. And that we have this amazing photo of, it ends up being, so it's myself, it's Parrot, it's Brinkman, it's Gavin Shapiro, another great artist, it's Matt Medved, who was in the process of founding and expanding NFT Now. But Medved had flown in from LA that day to cover the New York takeover. And who else is in that photo? But it's like you can tick off every person in that photo, and you can see that they've gone on to do really interesting things across the NFT space. But what that was full mask up, like full level at the time. And then you fast forward all those events, and the one you're talking about, I think it was NFT NYC, right? And all the events around it. All those first events in 2021 were really, really special. Really, really special. And the NFT NYC one is probably the first big scale one. I remember, that Ferocious paint party was so fun. I think I came with Raph, and we had a great time there and just enjoyed. But yeah, I remember that distinctly. Like I remember talking to you guys and saying that because I believed it, and still do.
So where do we get to the point where you and Micah decide to team up?
So once we start talking, we just started talking more, right? And a lot of our conversations would revolve sometimes around our brands. Like I would talk to Micah about Artifex. He talked to me about Aku. Some of it was just we were clicking on a level of we wanted to understand the space better together, and just what was I seeing and what was he seeing. As we get closer to Akutars, right? As we get close, so the last few chapters and then leading into Akutars. At that point, I was giving a lot of market insight, pure market insight. Here's what I'm seeing, and here's my philosophy on pricing and mechanics and sort of where we might see this go, and responding to the market in an agile sense, because things change really fast, and I think it's impossible to plan price points out, much earlier than a month ahead, and you should still be ready to change, really pending how things roll. So a lot of it was that, and just. That pipeline was ramping up, and I would come in, and we got to a point where we're talking daily in advance of the Akatar release. For like a month or 2 months ahead of that, it was every day. What are you seeing? What am I seeing? Here are my thoughts, here's how I would do it today. And then things just kept rolling forward. And then Akutars, I think in one sense, we obviously know in another sense, but in one sense, from just the pure success lens for getting contractual stuff and all that, it did really, really well. Like it was an incredible release. Obviously the other side was super disappointing in the moment. But that was the time. I would say the ramp up to that, and then coming off the back of that, at some point we just started to say, like, if something makes sense at some point down the road, maybe we'll formalize this, right? And I was not looking, I was not shopping myself. I was not like, hey, it would be cool, be the head of Web3 somewhere. No, it was, I had Artifex and what I was doing there, and I had things that I was very, very passionate about outside of that. But it ended up clicking in. It ended up making sense one day, and I think we arrived at that very naturally. And I think the coolest thing is when you are willing to do something, for free. Obviously you may have some of those assets or some of the artworks, but like giving a lot of yourself and your time away for free. But there's a reason for that, and that wasn't a thought. It wasn't like, like I have a cap on the amount of time. No, I was just following what I was passionate about, following someone that I was becoming good friends with, and let's go. Like, we're all seeking to understand this space together and do some really amazing stuff along the way. And we know, I think in our heart of hearts, those that are here today know that some incredible lasting things will come out of it. And we are in the process right now of seeing what those things are. And I think that that's a very, very exciting place in time. It can be a stressful time. It can be a hard time, but I think it's looked at the other way. It's a pioneering and quite an exciting time because we know some stuff's going to come out the other side. And that's the way history books are written.
Very nice. I agree with everything that you said. Roger, putting on your collector's hat for just a moment, what are some of the most attractive base Akutar traits that you like, OG traits that you like, and finally mega traits that you like?
I'm really fascinated. So pure collector hat, I've been fascinated with megas. But that's been my recently I remember going through all 529 of them. And I think it's interesting. Okay, so an interesting discussion is the commercial rights, right? What do they mean? I mean, you can go anywhere. Even if you want to expand the dialogue, you can go, okay, CCO, full commercial rights, partial commercial rights, whatever. You can kind of use that whole framework. And we're in this interesting point too, where we understand that it's valuable to some extent, right? To possess something with rights, period, right? We understand that there should be value. Now, you can't attach that to anything. You can't attach that to a rock and expect it to be valuable. But when it is attached to something that matters, yeah, there's clearly value there. No one knows what the right amount of value is to put on it yet. No, very, very few people know what to do with that yet. But we are seeing people begin to experiment, and that's really, really cool. I am someone who ultimately would love to experiment and to do something concrete. And so I started to look at the megas. I'm like, what would the mega be? And putting that side of what would I do? Or even thinking about it from the story side, what story would I tell around a mega if I had the opportunity to do so? And so I was looking through literally all of the 529, getting down to the nitty gritty. And I ended up making a trade with Rusty, the legend Rusty in the Aku community. We ended up swapping megas because I saw something in the one that Rusty had, and I said, it wasn't like a super duper special rare trait one, but it was just one that I quite liked. And then the same thing on the other side. Rusty said, I like that one that you have, and it became the easiest trade where no one was getting one up on the other. It was just purely an aesthetic situation. Yes, done. Easiest person in the world to deal with, and yeah, all love and respect to Rusty. We're forever intertwined now.
How important is letting, I guess, like the governor switch off on the megas? Because, I think that there's not a lot of people, but there are people that kind of have like the troops lined up on the beach, ready to like go crazy. I try and look at like what other projects are doing that do have the commercial rights. To be honest, like in my limited scope, like the apes is kind of the one, but I have not seen a ton of usage of the commercial rights. Now, like I've heard, like I think it was like Seth Green or maybe I got that wrong, but like he got his stolen and he was like trying to work like doing something like a cartoon or something. There's definitely been like a couple of brick and mortar businesses, but there really hasn't been like, I live in LA. I haven't driven down the street and seen an NFT commercial rights, billboard or something. So where are we at in that?
It speaks to the opportunity. So I would say the two most famous cases to me from a public standpoint are Jenkins the Valet, right? Who goes on to create an entire community-based IP brand around an ape. And I think and it becomes Tally Labs and they raise, I forget, millions and millions of dollars. So I think that like financially, and the root of that was really leveraging an ape, but far more, right? Obviously a big concept, but just kind of using that as the figurehead of it, which is valuable because you're tying into a huge community web. And in that case, Jenkins was one of, if not the first mover at a grand scale. And that matters too. So that's an interesting one. I think monetarily, that's the number one now. And then Jimmy licensed the Four Apes for a music band. And I don't know what the inner workings of that deal look like, but I thought it was fascinating at the time. Why not? If a brand or an IP base is getting national renown, even in a niche sense, it doesn't matter. Like it can still be pretty valuable, especially when you know that Apes is pushing into, at the time, some musical performances, and they were sort of gaining a little bit of cachet out there. So those are the two most famous cases that I would say over in that brand, but by extension, because of what that brand is, the whole space. But it speaks to the infancy of this. It's that we don't see those billboards, that we don't see. It's just the absolute infancy of understanding. And again, my base premise is this: if the brand matters, then by extension, commercial rights that are attached to that brand or something tangential to that brand have value, period. Now, what is that value? We are even pre-price discovery. Like we are in the absolute early days wilderness of sort of sifting through this and understanding what matters and why and what comes out the other side. And I do think it's also important to note that decisions and changes can be made. We saw on the Aku side, we can get back to Loveox, your question about how important, or one of you guys asked it, but how important you think this is. We can get back to that in a second. But you can see other brands have made change. We're looking to make a change to open. You've seen, well, I guess this is also opening, but you saw Moonbirds flip to CCO. And some people felt some sort of way about that. They said, wait a second, this is not the premise that this was sold on. It was sold on a premise of commercial rights, and then it flipped to CCO. And certain people said that, like, no, you can't do that. So I do think there are ways to make changes, but very few things are fixed today. This is very much discovery process on multiple levels. Back to how important I think it is for Aku. I think it's important. I do. I think it's important. I thought it was very important to open it in the first place, and we worked hard on that. Worked harder to wrap minds around it and connect on it. And remember, like, it's not an easy process. We're talking about, as far as a character goes, I firmly believe. I think this is the character IP that has the biggest shot in the NFT space to go on to be at Disney. Or something at that level. And I think you can go on from there. I would absolutely give other brand shout outs. I think the work that I think Pudgy's gotten a lot of heat lately, and for good reason. You could see that. You could see a cute cartoon. You could see that character being popularized. Absolutely. But to me, there's a number one from a character IP standpoint that I could see being a monumental future we look back on, and it's like, wow, that was a really special time because it ended up becoming this in the end. But we're early. There are no guarantees in life. It's just strictly looking at it and saying there is a shot here. Like there is a real shot to see something like that happen. And with that, it's hard to open up rights because IP actually has to be and should be protected for that future use case. I'm sure we will see some CCO stuff like break out in its own way and be popularized in a little bit of a different way. But if you are, if in the future you're trying to, and I'm not saying this is the case, not even trying, but like if there is a future in seeing a character at Disney or at a major brand, I'm not dropping any alpha. I'm just using them because it's a recognizable brand. But that is controlled IP. That's the ball game to get that character into a big slot like that. So it's hard to open up rights to anything, right? But megas have the different helmet construct and they're a different character than Aku, and I think it's really attractive, fertile ground to look at, to say, on one hand you have protected IP, and on the other hand you do have a creator who birthed the character in Web3, and I think has a lot of respect for the Web3 ethos and sort of like the digitally native roots and the way about going down that road. So is there a win-win? Is there a win-win? I think megas are a really interesting place to start looking for that win-win. And if those rights can be opened up further to where, JWoww, you said people on the shore kind of waiting, where they are mobilized and they feel empowered, I think it's very, very worth exploring.
RD, for those who may not know, can you define what CCO actually means?
Yeah, so it's Creative Commons usage. It just means that there's no benefit other than having an asset's provenance, which can be valuable in its own right, but there's no benefit for me. Like if I held, actually, let's go here, LoveVox, your background, right? Let's say they were all CCO. It wouldn't matter that you possess them. I could grab your mega down bottom left hand, craft a story around it, go to town, unleash derivatives and do all sorts of stuff around that mega, and you would have no claim. You owning that asset, I'd be able to do the same things as you essentially with full CCO. And you can see, when and where does provenance matter? Certainly matters relative to the creator. Like Xcopy, I think one of the most infamous creators who has unleashed CCO around his artworks, which is awesome. But Xcopy is so far sainted as like a historical figure in this that I think CCO in the short to midterm is only a benefit, and is very likely to be a benefit in the longer term. And he moves so well around it to where he can use that as a virality tool. But I don't think anyone has a real shot to do something bigger with the work than Xcopy himself. I think it's much more of a risk for someone that's like small. You create something amazing. You're super small. Everyone's super small around it. Maybe someone loves the asset, your CCO. You could eventually see like the derivative trump the original. And I think that's interesting to look at as well.
So we're kind of running short on time. I have two things that I would like to kind of touch on in a hyper mode. The first is with the recent Blur situation, and now like OpenSea going to 0% for the artist fees. Like that was really kind of like always the big thing, like for creators, was like, you mentioned the word provenance, like if Andy Warhol sold a painting, he never got a dime after it, and that was kind of this draw and empowerment for artists. How I feel like it's kind of sick, but at the same time, was 10% maybe too much to be giving for royalties as well? So I can see both sides. Where are you at?
So I have a lot of thoughts on this. A lot of thoughts. Number one, and this is kind of a message. I've been trying to say this whenever I can. Number one, putting royalties aside for a second, because by the way, I support them, but maybe not in their current form. I think they need more nuance. They definitely need more nuance. They need an evolution. However, let's put that aside for a second. Don't miss the point, is my message to everyone. Like the premise that we are here based on is not royalties. Now, again, I support them, but we're putting them aside for a moment. The premise that we are here, 100%, the bedrock foundation is digital asset ownership. Period. Why should I be here as an artist? Because you can sell your digital art with provenance, and that was not possible before. You would have had to create books, prints, screensavers, wallpapers. You would have had to commission it to sell it to a different brand to use in advertising and marketing and company campaigns. There was no way to pursue a career based on digital asset ownership. And I think that cannot be overlooked. So even if you told me royalties will be 0% forever, that would stink, because I think that there's some magic there. But it would be a path. And, it wouldn't be necessarily a path that's better or worse than anything else, but it's a path that didn't exist before. And so I just want everyone to remember that. It's still groundbreaking in its own right. Now, let's bring royalties in, because it becomes an even greater and more amazing proposition with royalties. I am a believer in that. I think it's a beautiful story. I think that it's a meaningful story. I think that it's very clearly something that the mainstream understands, and the mainstream does not understand much about this space still to this day, but they do understand the classic starving artist becomes a little older, work becomes more renowned, they have no ties to it, and it sells for $10 million or $1 million or $500,000. It doesn't matter. Versus they have a little bit of a tie to it. That's, who doesn't want that? Now, in terms of royalties, is there a better way to do it than flat 10% across the board, which was the original proposition? Yes. However, the artist that pioneered that doesn't change the instinct there. It doesn't change the value of that. Huge shout out to the Matt Canes and the Coldies and the X copies. Where does the flat 10%, where is that closer to right or 100% right? One of one art, high end one of one art, which by the way is what they created that around. But now that the space is matured, now that it's diversified, now that you have 10, 20, you'll ultimately have 100, 500K collections, as we go full out there. Yeah, we need diversity. We need nuance. We see artists like JRAM experimenting with dynamic royalties, to the sense that he just told his collectors, if you lose money on a transaction surrounding my art, keep the royalties. Like, you're having some artists sort of take that leadership. Now, I'm not suggesting that flat zero would be the percent either in that case, but it's interesting to see people understanding that maybe circumstantially royalties should have some dynamism to them. Maybe one of one versus small edition, large edition, open edition, 10K plus PFP edition. Maybe we should have different levels and scales of royalties. I still think the 0% thing for a project that delivers and has a forever intent to keep doing things around it, I still think the zero thing bothers me a little bit, because I think you're essentially like cutting the project in and creating a symbiosis about wanting to deliver on your behalf. And the zero talk is just essentially changing the game. All the people that want airdrops and special attention and lean in, if the answer is zero across the board for whatever reason, you're just not going to get that. There's going to be far less incentive for the project or the brand or the creator to do that. And you'll kind of be on your own in a sense. So I think it's just a matter of pros and cons, as it always is. Assess them. What do you care about? But we do need more dynamism.
And my exit question for you, and I'll give LoveVox his opportunity too. We always ask, what's the biggest rug for you? You're a poker player. You always have a bad beat story. So what is your NFT bad beat story that, even though you're supposed to keep it out of your head, but we all have them?
Do you mean where I failed?
Yes. Like you bought something that didn't work out. Yeah.
This is Nifty Gateway days. This is like the first peak where I think we're in like April 2021, May 2021. I consider myself to be as level-headed as they come, but in the moment, I think I was a little overheated myself. And there's an artist, Trevor Andrew, who created Gucci Ghost, and he has a very, very grounded, sort of traditional art career, doing some interesting things, poking at that brand and then later aligning with that brand. Came into the space and had a very successful first two releases. And I remember buying the #1 edition of an out of 10, the Gold Ghost, for preposterous amount. And I think that was the classic case of everything's overheated. I'm overheated. You're looking for the overheated thing to then sell for an overheated amount. I think everyone loses themselves at some point in time, and that became my horror story, where it ended up being something that I held for quite some time, and then ended up just not all that long ago releasing. But that is by far my #1 moment.
Good old tax harvesting opportunity.
That's amazing. Yeah, and my final question: what was it about Rusty's Mega that caught your attention?
I love the white belt. So I tend to be over the top one way or the other. I either like aesthetic simplicity, like clearly identifiable couple traits, and you sort of start there and you look at those, you can craft yourself some form of a narrative. or the other way. Like every now and again, I'll highlight something that's just a complete hot mess, but it almost has its own appeal for that side of things. But the Rusty Mega was twofold for me. I really like this idea of a white belt, always learning, always learning, always progressing, always like moving with humility, with the idea to be better and better and better as you go. I think that fits as well with the message of Aku, right? And I think the beautiful thing about Aku is we've all sort of to some extent, put our own thoughts about like what Aku is thinking, because Aku can't speak, and we sort of have these raw storyboard moments through the chapters, and we've seen some of the collaborations. We could draw our own conclusions, but to me, there's humility there, and there's a desire to do better that's reflected in sort of that starting a white belt journey. And then the weapon of choice is the bat, right? I love that it ties back to the creator, Micah, and I just think there's some beautiful messaging there. So I did imagine sort of this martial arts based character with the weapon of choice being the bat itself.
Awesome. Well, I know we could easily go for a couple more hours, but real life comes into play at some point, and we're recording this bright and early on Monday. Perfect for the Monday Moon God pod. Roger, you are a moon god, and more importantly, you're one of the pillars of our community. So definitely want to give you thanks for coming on to the show. For LoveVox, I'm JwowLax. We will see you next time.